Well, hello and welcome to the Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software, and I'm pleased to introduce Dion McCormick, no relation, who is our lead solutions engineer today. Dion has got lots of great content for you, and he's also here to answer your questions. So you could go ahead and get started right now and type your questions into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. So before we begin, just one more thing you should know, besides the fact that you should be typing in your questions, the other is that this session will be recorded, and this and other sessions can be found at videos.alphasoftware.com. So let's begin. Hello, Dion, are you there?
Yes, sir. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thank you. Let me go ahead and make you the presenter, and I'll let you know when I can see your screen. And there it is.
Excellent. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for taking your valuable time to visit with us this week. We have some really cool stuff for you to go through. A couple things from our fabulous developers who send in questions. And speaking of questions, in your GoToWebinar control panel, you should see an area called questions. Please take the time to type your questions in now, and as we go through the presentation, feel free to type in your questions either regarding this or any other question you have. That's the goal, is to kind of help you determine and figure out what you need from Alpha. And we find out, excuse me, so excited, that also it really helps us too when you take time during the week to send us questions to guides, that's GUIDES at alphasoftware.com. It allows us to review it. We can get back to you ASAP, and it also provides us information, and in fact we have one today from that. And so we really appreciate you taking the time, and we also really appreciate it when you take the time to put in questions either beforehand or on our conversation today. So jump into the questions area, put those in. Dave will be monitoring them very, very closely, and we are going to go into our presentation right now. So what I want to talk about, and I'm going to scoot down here, in Alpha Anywhere, recently, and this is a fairly recently new capability, is Alpha added what are called control bars. And what control bars are, and this is somewhat of a recap, is that super valuable area at the top and bottom of your screen. And they go way beyond that in functionality. But the key was Alpha looked at what was the effort level to put together these control bars. So like, for instance, to put together a header control bar, items at the top, bottom, even creating control bars that pop down that allow you to modify things, kind of as this overlay is showing right here. So Alpha put together a special control bar component, and this control bar component makes it very easy for you to create very powerful areas at the top and bottom of your screen. And what's really neat about them is that they're dynamic. They can be data driven so that they can change and modify as you go through it, and they also allow you to put inputs in a whole bunch of different pieces there. About 2 months ago we did a detailed walkthrough. It was actually a number of days showing you the key capabilities of the control bar, and I suggest if you get a chance to go back and check those out. It's a really good introduction. It will cover the core elements of what a control bar is and how it works. Now, with that, we were talking a lot recently, or I've been talking a lot of how is the best way to deploy the control bar. And often we focus kind of on that top control bar. So this area at the top of your screen, and this is probably the best representation where you're showing navigation, you're showing information up here and dynamically setting it there. But the neat thing about a control bar is it can also do the bottom area here. And the bottom bar is also very, very powerful because contextually it will allow you to show the user extra information. So it actually allows you kind of show at the top where they're at, what they're working on, and then have some control at the bottom. And so I got a lot of questions about it. So I did some research, and our presentation today is actually about the control bar, specifically what are the best practices for getting the most out of your control bar at the bottom of the screen, not the top, but the bottom, which is very powerful. And if you look at a lot of, any of your iOS or Android applications, an enormous amount of thought goes into that, especially if you look at like applications from Facebook or Instagram or any of those very major ones. They spend enormous amount of money and time optimizing and doing designs and working on creating a very powerful a very powerful environment. It's simple to use. And from that, there's some best practices that have come out of it I'd like to walk through today to give you a feel for when you put together a control bar, what are the things you should think about, and what are some things that will avoid some common errors that are out there. So before I get into that fully, I wanted to just, again, as I go through this, feel free to put in questions into the questions area of the GoToWebinar control panel. And Dave just wanted to do a process check, make sure things are coming through and I'm sounding okay and visually it's working fine.
Yep, it's all coming through. Thank you.
Excellent, 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 excellent. So why is the bottom control bar? You know, we're going to look at why they're so important and what's up there. Now, this is the most important fact you're going to probably take away, and the most interesting one thing is that 49% of all users who have smartphones use a single thumb to interact with their mobile phone. And in fact, if you look at iOS and stuff, there's special techniques that were added to it. You can double tap on the home button and it actually scoots things down like on a big screen. I have a plus screen because my eyes are shot, and allows you to do that because people are used to sitting there. They've got their latte in one hand, or they've got their kid, or they've got books, or whatever it happens to be. So the ability for you to interact and manipulate with that app is very important. And give people the ability to do that with a single thumb. And if we look at that, why is it so important? Well, if we look at where the thumb can reach, if you're holding the phone normally, it's much, much easier for your thumb to handle and reach the bottom. So you're seeing the ease of attractiveness, like how easy is it for this thumb mechanically to touch the screen. So you'll notice here in this hand you have it's about halfway down, so therefore you have a very broad area being able to touch it. And that's where most people hold their phone. It's kind of at the bottom. They kind of hold it with the bulk of their phone above their hand. And if you force the person to hold it here, you can get to these areas much easier up top. But the problem with it is that the hand, it's awkward. It's hard to get to those bottoms. So what you want to do is optimize that a lot of interactions are going to happen at the bottom of the screen, not the top. The top really will be interim kind of activities that don't happen very often, so you can kind of move and stretch, but also context kind of information. So that's why the bottom bar is so important, is that for that 50% of your users, and think about that, half of your people are going to be handling their phones this way, you need to make it easy for them to be able to interact with your app. And the best way to do that is have a very powerful and simple to use bottom bar that's been optimized for them to be able to do almost everything they can with a single thumb in that. And you notice if you're holding it here, you can pretty much still get almost that whole screen, all the pieces. There's just areas that you just can't get to kind of scenario from there. So it's important to place top level and frequently used actions at the bottom of your application, because that's where they're going to be, if you're interacting with the app, that's where you're going to be doing that often, meaning that those are where you want to put those constant interactions. Every once in a while, interactions can be at the top or elsewhere, but if you have the user constantly doing something in there, like navigating or checking things or adding information or launching things, it needs to be at that bottom bar. So here's an example here from Facebook, and this is probably dated. Facebook changes so often, but you'll notice that they made it easy for you to navigate, because most people are reading their newsfeed and then they want to go over and look at requests or messages. So therefore, the navigation of that to move to those modes for Facebook is at the bottom of the screen, because when I'm sitting there watching my newsfeed, and then I go, you know what, I want to check my messages. I don't have to go to the top and do anything. I can literally, with my thumb, with a single move, I can move it over like an inch, hit messages or notifications or requests, especially if I've gotten a notification on the screen that a new one came in. I don't have to go reach up. I can click it on the bottom. So as you can see, a company such as Facebook, and it'd be really cool if I could actually spell the name of the company properly. Instead, and also, if anybody has seen the social network, the Facebook instead of Facebook. But you'll see that most companies, and if you open up your apps and start looking at them, this bottom area is used very, very heavily from that standpoint there. So what are some of the first best practices? First is you don't want to clutter that bottom bar. You want to make sure that only the really key top level, what are called important destinations, are at the bottom, are handily there. Because again, since it's the bottom and you're only using a sliver, you don't have a ton of space to put like 50 icons in there. So you want to use that. Now the other, which is very important, is that you want to show them their current location. So for instance, if they're on the newsfeed and looking at the newsfeed, you'll see in there that they've highlighted newsfeed. So it gives you a visual indicator and feedback of what you're on. And when you click on a different button, you'll immediately see that button change highlighting as a visual confirmation that you have navigated to the right place, that when you clicked request, you're there. Now what's really cool is Alpha has built into it this button bar concept. So we've already handled all the complexity for you. Basically, you can create it where when you go to that, it will automatically highlight it for you. And it's very handy, very simple, and very easy to use. So very important is that only the most important destinations, you want to show them there. And again, navigation should be self-evident by keeping it very simple. Here's a couple like, a couple other notes. Only show 5 things. If you show more than that, it just clutters it and it takes them too much. And very important is avoid scrollable content. Actually, technically, Alpha has the ability to put in scrollable content on that bottom bar, and we can do it, but we, as a best practice, you want it always to be almost like a fixed area, which has a fixed set of information that's at that location right there. Again, maybe you have a situation where you want to scrollable content, but there's some other methods where with Alpha you can, when you can drill down using that bottom bar from that standpoint. So again, show only about 5 things on there and make them the most important things you do. The other is icons. When you're communicating where you're at, the very important thing is that text is hard to read, especially when you're talking about such a small area at the bottom of your screen. So leverage your icons, meaning make those very visible, make them related to the kind of information. And if I go back to here, you'll see the news feed looks like a news thing. Requests are from people, messages has a little message icon. Notifications is a globe. I'm not sure about that one, but that probably makes sense within the Facebook realm. I don't use it a whole lot. But you want to make the icon mean something, because even if you have this text here, they're going to be seeing the icon. We're very graphical oriented as far as humans, and so it's faster for us to see an icon, recognize and hit it, than to read some text kind of thing. The other, and this is very important, is if you look at internationalizing your application, which is a key capability. Alpha has a lot of internationalization capabilities, but the more graphical the nature of your app is, the less text there is, guess what? The lower cost it is to develop and the less development effort you have to do. So for instance, we have clients in Canada, and by law, when they start doing these things, they have to include both English and French for Quebec and that area there. So for real, they have to go in there and spend money to do both these kind of scenarios, i.e. you got to have to be able to say what language do you prefer and show the preferred language there. So the fewer amount of that they have to do, the easier it is to build their apps. So therefore they're very, very graphic icon oriented. They literally have a company, a marketing company, designing custom icons for their apps, because they find that it's cheaper for them to design these custom icons versus having to manage multiple languages at an extent within the application itself. So avoid multiple colors also. Stick to a very simple scheme that just says highlighting, because you don't want to try and convey more information like, oh, I'm on that and the color is red, or the color's yellow, or the color's green. It's just too much information. This is, KISS, keep it simple, simple. Now they do add text labels, which kind of goes against my spending money on that. And again, the reason why is that if you're like a first-time user, you can do that. But I'm kind of moving away from text labels as much as possible just to be able to make it easy there. Often you can use a help screen when they first launch the app to tell them what the different pieces. And the other is that, when they start getting used to it, they're not going to be reading it, they're looking at the icon. So the text labels over time aren't as valuable from that standpoint. And then size, make it easy to tap, meaning that you want to make these big enough so that with the big thumb you can just boo it and you don't accidentally hit 2 of them. So you don't want to try and shrink them into a bunch of small icons. The key is to do there. A couple other things too is that the other is like bottom bars should only be used to navigate. You really think of it as your navigation tool, your steering wheel for your application. You don't want to really have like disclosures, which are pop-up windows and other things, come up from the bottom. That can be handled at the top, and actually, by the way, Alpha control bars have full capabilities to do that. And again, consistency. Don't be like changing every time you move. Don't make that thing change every time, because once people get into a pattern with using your application, if you're swapping out that control bar and changing it every 2 moments, it sort of negates the benefit that you have of creating a very simple navigation system within that. And the other is use the crossfade capability. I honestly haven't checked this. I'm not sure if Alpha has it, but you know, instead of like an instantaneous button, which is kind of how it is, one thing they recommend is a crossfade. Kind of gives you a transition feel. It communicates that I've hit this button and there's a crossfade between, actually I take that back, it's not the icons that crossfade, it's the content within yours. And Alpha does have that ability. When you do a panel-to-panel navigation, which is what we'll be doing here, you can use animation. And if you use animation, you can use transition effects, maybe not crossfade, but something similar. And the idea behind that is that when the user clicks the button, you could instantaneously change the content in the screen, and that's fine. That's no rules against it, but if you use some kind of transition, they get a visual confirmation that your request, which is a click on the button or a thumb on the button, has been there, and it gives them like that little like, okay, I've made movement from one place to the other. It just doesn't instantly all the content change. So again, if you can, use some kind of animation to then move to display the new content once they've selected a button on the bottom side from that standpoint. And so really that's the best practices there. This is about designing from your users. First and foremost, and this is critical, is that you're designing for 49% of your users are single thumb using. So you really want to have that 49. I'm not sure what the other 50 people are doing. 50% of the people are doing. We're not really sure from that standpoint. Use a bottom simple navigation control bar. Focus on big icons, keep it simple, don't swap it around, keep the color scheme simple, and also make it very evident of what the different pieces are from that standpoint there. And again, make it really about your important destinations within your application. And they're saying avoiding scrollable and 5 destinations there. Key is no multiple colors, don't make it very garish, don't really get it very event there, and also make it all about navigation and consistency and giving the people indicators that I press this button, it changes the color, and then also the screen content will change and you do it in an animation way. And this is all about designing for your users, i.e. that, as engineers, which most of us are, we're like, let's just get the functions down and do it. But if you can add a little bit more elegance and a little bit more time, and Alpha spends a lot of time giving you those kind of capabilities by including things like SVG icons, which are very easy to use and very easy to go out and find nice looking icons on companies. In fact, we've shown it before. There's a place called Flat Icons that has just an enormous number of very beautiful icons that are in groups, so you can say, okay, I'm doing a delivery app, and so you have delivery type icons that are all coordinated, look nicely, and allow you to color them appropriately. And if you do this, your users are going to have more enjoyable experience with their applications. They're going to be less confused. They're going to be able to use it, especially as they get more experience. They will get to the point where they can navigate extremely quickly using these kind of concepts. And that really is the goal for a great app, is to make it easy to use, that it doesn't take a lot of effort to do what you want them to do with that application. And navigation is a key part, because the app isn't just going to be one screen, it's going to be multiple things you're doing with that app, the ones I've seen at least most people are doing with Alpha. And the really cool thing about that is that, again, you'll get great feedback from people if you just put a little bit. And realize too, we're not all experts in everything. In fact, that's guaranteed we aren't all there. And so if you're I kind of call it, I'm the plumbing guy. I'm really good at getting in there and making Alpha do what it needs to do, talk to back-end databases, allow you to edit data offline, do all that stuff. But when it comes to graphic capability, I'm kind of at a stick figure level as a personal basis there. But here's the deal. There are great resources out there. Upwork. Another one I like a lot is Fiverr, where there are thousands of very talented icon developers, screen developers, graphic artists, all these that you can tap into very inexpensively and leverage their capabilities. So don't be afraid to say, hey, you know, I'm not a very good icon generator. I can go to an icon factory place and pick them up there, or I can go on something like Fiverr and have someone build them custom for me for very little. But that investment will pay off, meaning that your app's going to be easier to use, it's going to look nicer, your users are going to be happier and have more enjoyment, so therefore they're going to use your app more, and you'll enjoy it. So again, thank you for this. I just thought I'd kind of provide sort of a high-level view of this on the control bar, and please, if you have questions about this or anything, let us know. Dave?
Yes, please do enter in your questions. We only have a couple, and we have a lot of people who are on the line, so I know not everyone knows everything about Alpha Anywhere. You wouldn't be here. So if you have a question, now would be a great time to go ahead and type it in.
Don't make us reinstitute the beatings. We kind of took that away a while ago.
Right, exactly. It might be two question minimum from now on if you're going to sign up.
Yeah.
So let's take a look here through the questions we do have. Okay, so let's start with one. This doesn't have to do with control bars. It has to do with writing server handlers for our error handlers on the server. This may be one that we have to get back to you, but let's give it a try. This emailed just as we were starting. So that they have an application that's running without a hitch for a couple of months, and then they started throwing up some random unhandled exceptions while executing a number of XBasic functions that use SQL statements. But the server logs don't give enough detail to know which XBasic functions are throwing the error. Is there some way to write some sort of XBasic error handler that can identify, or how would you go about troubleshooting something like that if you were?
Absolutely. Actually, Alpha has some very detail and capabilities to handle that, and I can show you that real quick. So
Great.
Let me go ahead and go in. I've jumped over into my development environment, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new component here. And I'm going to go to create a UX, which is form command. And I'm just going to create an empty component right now. And let's say in this here, let's go ahead and put a button here. And then I'm going to put in a, let's put in a, okay, results. Okay, so I have a really simple kind of scenario, and I'll go ahead here and put in show results. So what I want to do is when I click this button, I want it to show some results. So it's going to run some back-end XBasic using what's called an XBasic callback, and we really should do a dedicated session on XBasic callbacks. We've talked about it before, but there's a lot of great things you can do with them. So the idea is when I click this button, it's going to run some XBasic and the results. And so I'm going to go ahead and show you how to create that, very simple, but then I'm also going to show you how I put in my error trapping so that I can start trapping errors. Alpha is going to trap exceptions, but often what will happen is two things. One is that exception that's caught is just kind of a raw one, and therefore it's just what the system says, well, this happened here. This is all we know. But you can actually add your own error trapping in there that's very valuable, that allows you to do two things. One is gather more information about the problem, but also very, very important too, it also allows you to handle it gracefully. So you don't have users having weird messages pop up and stuff like that. You can, I call it die gracefully instead of in a panic there. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up. I'm going to add a new action with my Alpha Ajax, or what's called Action JavaScript. And then what I'm going to do here is add a Ajax callback, and I'm going to call this routine, which is do stuff on server. Okay, and I'm going to say create the function prototype, so it'll create it for me, and I'm going to just paste it in here. So now when I click that button, it's going to call the server and run some XBasic, and it's going to run this right here. Now you'll see I have a control here called results, so I'm going to go back to my XBasic function here, and I'm just going to say e._set dot let's see, results dot value is equal to hey hello from server. Okay, so you'll notice here I have set results. Now this is built in, you'll see it's right here. Basically I'm just saying set the field called results value to be hello from server. And so that's all it's going to do is that's passing back the result of my item here. So let's go ahead and go in here and let's make this a little wider by making it say 50%. Okay. So we'll go call back error trap. Okay. So let's go ahead and do a little quick walkthrough and watch what happens, and you'll see that, okay, everything worked great. Looking good. We're doing good. So that's excellent there. So now let's say on the server side, instead of something doing so simple as, let's say I'm going to do some math, and I go dim x equal as in and dim y as in. So x is going to be a number y. X is equal to 5. Y is equal to 10, and result is equal, and then I'll go dim result math result as in. So then I'll go math result is equal to x times y. And then what I want to do is I want to go ahead and say, let's go ahead and give me back the math result. So it's like a calculator function. Basically, when this runs, it dimensions my values, puts 5 in x, puts 10 in y, does some math, and off to there. So I'll go and click save. And let's do that here. And if I've done right, 50. Okay, good news. This is solid code. Nothing's ever going to happen to it. In fact, we could make it, I could make it easier. But so now let's do this. Let's say I'm Mr. Fumblefingers, and I go ahead and put in Z. Okay, so I'm Mr. Fumblefingers. So now what if I do here, watch what happens. Blah, blah, blah. Now it does give me a result here, but that's kind of disturbing for two things. One is that it may be a situation where this is a back-end process where I don't have this user interface. Two, this like message would scare the crap out of a user, like, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? So Alpha has a couple cool things. So what I'm going to do in here is, and I use this so much that I use my handy dandy code library to create this. So I'm going to add error trapping into it. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to go, where is it? Error handler right here, and I'm going to call it do stuff on server. So I've actually created a code genie to actually create this. You'll notice it spit this out. So I'm going to grab this here, and I'm going to put that here. Let me walk you through what's going on here. So the first thing it does right here is I put in a statement that says on error go to. You can tell this is basic because there's a go to. You'll see that it says on error go to this location. So this is just a location name. And now if you'll notice down here, there's a location name. So if anything happens in here, and you'll notice there's an end statement, because once I finish what I'm normally doing and I want to kick out, I don't want to keep running. But if anything were to happen here, what's going to happen is the system is going to say, raise its hands and say, okay, I'm going to take you here and start running this code right here, and it's up to you to do what you want to do. So you'll notice that it already pre-generated some nice code me. First, it's going to go ahead and get the error code, and Alpha has certain error codes on there, and then it's going to translate that into a message, and now that I have that information, I can do something with it. So let's go ahead and run this with this in there. So what's going to happen is when I run this, and in fact, let's show you how this works. I'm going to show it first just running, and then I'll come back and walk you through how it's going here. So let's go into working preview. I'm going to sit here, and I'm going to click show results, and you'll see that didn't that work that? Oh, I'm sorry. It's not EJOT JavaScript. That's on the other. It's do stuff on server. Is that okay? That's my little mistake there. Basically, what it is that I'm returning this this created JavaScript to run. So let me go on here. So now, okay, I'm getting the same error, but now instead of big red thing, it's going on here. So you'll see I'm getting the same error, and it's reporting what that error is. But in this case, it doesn't do as a big red thing. It's in a nice little message there. In fact, if I want to be nicer, I could say, if any error does occur, I would say something like this. Oops. Let's copy this. And you say alert we are sorry, an error has occurred, if you could spell DN, and has been reported. Okay, so now when we run this thing, show it there. Oops, it didn't there. Might actually, if I comment this out. So now I have a little nicer message that doesn't, it's not all about gobbledygook. At least the person says, hey, we found it in there. Now, what can I do with this? Well, first let me show you how this works here. So I'm going to go debug, and I'm going to walk you through the code right now and show you what happens. Okay, so I'm going to run this with the debug so we can walk through the steps and see what's going on. So I'm going to click show results, and it opened my debugger, and I'm going to start stepping through this. So these commands are working, that's working fine. Get to this command, watch what happens. Notice how it jumped and passed over everything else and went immediately here. So then the next thing it does is that it gets my error, and it's error code 16063. And this is an internal Alpha error code that we handle. But then Alpha has a nice function here that allows me to translate that into a message, and on that message, oh, it timed out in here, but it would give you that nice, hey, variable X, Y, Z, etc. And then the next step is I send a message back to the person. So what's going on is that in my code, when it detects an error, it jumps here and allows me to handle it. Now, a couple other things you can do, and this really gets back to what your question is. I could immediately do something like this, which is save to file, message, or even better, I usually go error in function XYZ plus message, and then I can go in there and put in C/debug/problem.txt. Now, what's going to happen now is that when this error occurs, I'm going to save to my dist file, wherever this is running. In this case, I've hard-coded this location. By the way, you can do things like you can use, actually there's a great function that gives you the, it's like, what is it? It's context.application.root. Can you, Sarah, if you can check on that, there's one that gives you the root. You can put this relative to where your app is running. But the idea is it's going to spit out both this kind of text and also the message of the error to a dist file. Now what's cool about that is that if it's running up on the server, then you know where that file is. You can jump on it and start seeing what is going on and have more detailed information than just the stuff that's going to show up in the error log. And you could put in here the date and time it occurred. You could actually add in here what are the values that were submitted to this. So it gives you all that information about when the error does occur, when does it occur, what are the variables, and you can make this as complex as you want in terms of spitting out that data. And so in this case, I save it to a file. You could, by the way, send an error, a text message. You could send an email with the information to you. I mean, there's infinite ways to do it, but usually I like to keep it simple, where you just get a save to file, because that's very hardcore and works every time, meaning that you don't have to worry about network connectivity or anything along those lines from that standpoint. So this is error handling, and I do this consistently in my UXs when I'm doing server-side code. If I am building XBasic modules here, and if I've got an XBasic module I'm creating, I will put that in there. So I'll put it in there. So anywhere I have XBasic coding, I wrap it in this error trapping capability so that I can die gracefully, and I can also trap and understand with it. And that becomes super variable. One thing that's nice when you're using on the client side, I can debug and walk through it, but you really don't have the debugger available at this point up on the server, so you kind of have to realize it's kind of like a black box scenario. And by doing this, it now spits out that information and allows you to see it on the server. So that's a bit long-winded, I'm sure, for the person who asked, but I want to kind of a little background on what this error handler does. And again, it's just the code is on here. Go to, put in the name here, put an end where your normal code stops, and then you put in that same designator here, and then you put in your code to then trap it from there. And that is really effective and works really, really well.
Excellent. Before you close up that code, we have a question that we actually get quite a lot, and that is, what the heck is E? E.set.
Very good point.
Look at the very beginning. It shows you that E is a pointer variable. What's it stand for? What's it mean?
That's a very good point. Let me go ahead and I apologize as I
Oh, it looks like
swipe this really quick. I want to find just a simple. Okay. So, and this is, bear with me. So you have a client here, and on that client is either a web browser or a PhoneGap app, which, by the way, has a web browser built into it. And on the server, we have our server, and you have things like Xbox Basic, etc. So what happens is when you have a UX component here, and you submit that UX back to the server, what we do is we wrap up all the content into that variable called E. And that variable called E now is available to the server-side code that allows you to then see and understand exactly what goes on the client. And thus it knows, like, for instance, at the very simple, like, let's go ahead and put it here. Let's do something real cool. So I'm going to say here, entered value, and it's a text box, and I'm just going to go ahead right here. So this is called entered value. So when I'm back here, the way I get that is that when this is called, I go entered value is equal to e.data submitted dot entered value. Okay, and let's go ahead and run this, and I'll show you what this is. So let's go ahead and put the entered value in here, and we'll call it hello there. And I'm going to click there. Okay, notice my debug is on, so I'm going to step here and check this out. E.dataSubmitted has that hello there. In fact, let's do this. I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to put in here E, and we're going to see everything inside E. Whoa, there's a lot of stuff in there. Basically, all the information on the client for that form has been put into this E variable, it's called a pointer variable, and sent back to the server. So you have an enormous amount of data. First and most importantly is that we have e.dataSubmitted. So you can see that we have my item here, entered value is the name of my field. That's the information that was inside that field. Thus, I could grab it out and use it as I need from that standpoint there. But also I have things like data old, data new, so I can tell what the old data was before they changed it. I can also get things like arguments and results, but there's also a whole bunch of other stuff in terms of what templates being used, what style. The sky's the limit. I mean, it's amazing. Like, what are my dirty columns? What has the user changed? Well, in my case, the only field I changed was entered value. So the E variable has like just gobs and gobs of data, and it's the state information of the form on the client machine. And vice versa, is when we resend it back, we actually send E back behind the scenes, but include with that information. So you'll notice here, if I go to my code, you'll notice something. When I want to set the results of my thing, notice I say e.setResults.value. So what I'm doing is E is sort of like all that information that got passed for the client to me to the server, and then within that I can then modify some stuff and then send that right back, and Alpha handles humming and all the download stuff, so it makes it really simple. And they send that back to it, and then the UX that's running on there grabs that E variable and then runs the JavaScript to then update your screen. So when this was working correctly, so let me go like this, what will happen is when I run this, and actually let me go ahead and get rid of my debug real quick because I don't need it right now. So I'm on my thing, on my server down there, let's say it's ABCD. When I click show results, what's going to happen is Alpha is going to wrap up everything on this screen, the values of this, everything else, put it into that E variable, send it back to the server, and then I'll be able to manipulate it. And what I do is I added some content to the E, which was that, say, hey, set the results value there, and then I send that E variable is automatically sent back, and so the UX that's running on the client then says, oh, thank you very much, and it's a callback, meaning that I sent some information to the server sent it back, and then it sort of grabs the information out and does what it needs to do to update the user interface. And that could be very sophisticated. For instance, like when you have a list control and you say, populate this list, the E object's going to grab that list information, send it up. It's going to get populated, all the data you need, come down, and then we're going to unpack that into the list. So a lot of really sophisticated things go on there. But the thing you need to realize is that E is what's coming from. It has all the information in the current state of that UX, goes up to the server processes it, adds some of its own stuff, sends it back down, and then off to the races from there. So that's kind of a quick introduction to the E variable. And again, if you ever want to see it, again, just go in any of your XBasic callbacks, put debug1, and then when I run it, let's go ahead and run it real quick. You can just type the letter E in here, and you can now look in here. And what's kind of nice too is you can sit there and you can click on it. Okay, there's no dirty columns here, but you can actually click on like an item, like let's say data submitted, and you'll notice there's no, but I can click here. So by the way, this is how I get the information from my entered value screen. So you can kind of use it as a way to analyze what's going on in there and the pieces that are available from that standpoint. So that's the E one. Now I do have another, before we get another question, I do have someone who submitted one through there, but if there's a follow-up on that, let's handle it now, Dave. But someone else submitted how to do publish session variables, and I wanted to show that before we ran out of time, because they took the time to email us.
Exactly. Well, no, just one quick comment is that someone who said they remember it's E because E equals everything is how they think about it.
Yeah. And also E equals MC squared. That's another reason too.
Good for you. Back to on ArrowGoTo real quick. We do have some documentation on the on ArrowGoTo, and I've just pasted that into the chat window. There's a link to that if someone would like to get more information on that.
And you know, it's sort of like the JavaScript has Java has try handle. See, I mean, every programming language has some kind of error trapping.
Yep.
Yeah, but I tell you, when I make code, I put in my error handlers because A, it helps me debug things easier, especially on a server. But more importantly, it's just good practice, and it's good. You're bulletproofing your code over time, and you can handle things, and the user isn't getting a weird experiment on our experience.
Yeah, excellent. All right, let's take a look at some session variables then.
Okay, so we had a question from Fort Lee, New Jersey regarding session variables, and the fact that session variables, how do I use them on a app out on on either a web browser or on an app out there? Little history. What session variables are, they're server-side entities, meaning that they live on the server, and that's where they live. And they're very powerful because, like, it's a scratch pad. You can store all your server-side variables and have, like, who the person is. You don't have to re-look it up, and it's memory. It knows who it is. Like a great example in a multi-tenancy situation is when the person logs in, you find out what organization they're with, and once you know what organization, you store that code, so when they add data to the system or view it or list it or whatever, you know, oh, it's this person, let's just limit it to this information. So that's pretty good. But the issue with session side is that session variables were originally not available to the client side, and there may be a situation where you want to use that session data on the client side. Well, Alpha, the development team, added a capability. So I've created a little example of it here. So let's make sure this is there. Okay, so let's go ahead, and I'm going to run this real quick and show you that. Notice I'm clicking show session variable right here. Now, what is going on here is that when I run this, let's go ahead and do this. Okay, so this is the on dialog initialize, and this, what I'm going to do is set a session variable called display message, and that's going to be called hello world. So this is done on the server, and this on a dialog initialize happens before I ever see this UX. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say show session variable, and you'll notice that it's showing me the session variable right here. Well, the interesting thing about that is that if I go into my button right here, what I'm doing is actually getting a session variable from the local side. So what's going on, I'm sorry, a little rough starting here, but session variables are not normally available to the client side. So if you're going to use a session variable, you need to do two things. First thing you need to do is go to properties, then go to published session variables. So in your UX builder, in properties, you have what is called published session variables. And in here, you can put any session variable you want that you want to be available on the client side. So for instance, I have this session variable I create called display message that lives on the server side. By adding it here, when Alpha sends information down to the client, it grabs that session variable, whatever the current value of it is, and packages it up and sends it down. And then I can use a piece of JavaScript to be able to then edit that information, or to grab that information and use it on the client side. So the cool thing about that is that, and you'll notice what I do is I'm setting a session variable, this happens on there, called display message. In my properties, I've told my UX that, hey, when you get generated, I want you to always grab whatever the current session.display message is. And the cool thing about this is every time the UX goes back and forth between the server, it's going to update this information, and I'll show you that in a moment. And then what I'm going to do is in my button, I'm going to run a little piece of JavaScript where I'm going to say, get the session variable display message. This will only work if I publish that session variable as a client-side item. And then you'll notice I'm doing a set value to set the value of display message. So what happens is when this runs, the session variable is on the server, and when this shows up on my browser, it's going to include the session variable as some client-side data. And now that I have that client-side data, I can then manipulate it. Now, to show you kind of where this becomes very cool and interesting is that you'll notice that when I run this, I go show session variable. Notice I'm clicking this multiple times. It's probably hard to see, but every time it's doing on that, it's grabbing the value of that session variable that was first transmitted and updating. So when I'm clicking here, I'm not calling back to the server. I'm basically saying, hey, whatever published session variable was put down on the local, go ahead and grab that and show it right here. So what I've done is I've created an XBasic callback function that's going to call a function called change session variable. So when I click this button, it's actually going to call back to the server. It is going to then run this function right here, and what I'm going to do is just update my session variable. So what I'm doing in my callback is I'm updating my session variable to be a new value there. Now you'll notice I'm not writing any other code to move that new session variable down to the server. So let's show how that works. So when this runs, we have an initial session variable called display message, and it's called hello world. So notice how every time I click this, it's giving me the same. Now I'm going to run this XBasic callback. What has happened is I went back to the server and I updated that session variable. Now watch what happens. When I click show session variable, it grabbed the new session variable value and put it into here from there. So the important thing about that is that once you've set up your published session variables, you're in a situation where the UX will automatically refresh those session variables on the client side every time it goes back and does something on the server. Either gets refreshed, does a lookup, does an XBasic callback, or something like that. So the important thing to realize is that session variables are server-side only. If you want to use them on the client, you have to go into your properties, publish session variables, and click OK, and then add that in here. And then there is and it's in this box right here, it shows you how to then grab that data when you're on the client to be able to use it. You'll notice you're just using get session variable, and then it's all uppercase with the name there. So I'm going to go ahead and send this over to Dave. If you're interested in getting a copy of this, you can just email us at guides@alphasoftware.com, and we can go ahead and send that over to you so you can see how this works and see exactly an example of it. But that's how you use it. You publish your session variables. Now those session variables are available on the UX, and the cool thing about it is that you'll notice in my case, I'm the one who changed this session variable, but let's say that session variable got changed by another person or something else, then the next time I do this update, it's going to give me whatever the value of that session variable is for me. So it's there's some cool things you can do with it from that standpoint. So that's the idea behind published session variables and using that on the client side. Dave?
Great. We've also had a request for the slides that you had from today's presentation talking about the best practices of Control Bar.
Oh, yeah. They're not very pretty. I was kind of old. I hadn't updated them. So I'll definitely get them out to you and get them over there as soon as possible.
Fantastic. So if you want them or the UX components, send an email to guides, G-U-I-D-E-S, @alphasoftware.com. Now, here is a terrific question about today's, not that they're not all great questions, they're all great questions,
Yeah.
but this one in particular I like. And so going back to that heat map that you had in your presentation, where if you're holding the phone, let's say in your right hand, then your thumb is going to have a big problem trying to reach that upper left-hand corner, that little red spot up there, or even the bottom right corner for that matter. But, you know, that's if you are right-handed. Would there be a way to set it up so that the user can say, hey, I'm left-handed, and then have the control bar buttons appear in a different way?
That is a absolutely fabulous question. The answer is yes, absolutely. The cool thing about control bars, and let me go ahead and find one of my control bar components here and bring it up. Okay, I'll just grab this one up right here. Okay, so this is the control bar. It's in my header right here. And what we were talking about is that if you have a control bar up in the header, if I have the hamburger menu here, then what will happen is it's hard to reach that hamburger menu. So wouldn't it be nice if I had that handle or that hamburger menu over where it's more, I'm sorry, not over there. Put it over here for righties, but then if I'm a left-handed person, and again, you can see we're very, I'm sorry. You'll see right here, if I'm left-handed, well, this is going to be easier to get there, so that, you know, I want to be able to move my hamburger menu back and forth. Well, the cool thing about a control bar is that a control bar consists of items. So I have my different items here, and then I have my control bar layout, and let's do refresh the preview. I'm not sure why it's not refreshing, something is there. But I have my preview of my control bar right here. Now, what I can do is have multiple layouts. So let's go ahead and create a new layout. And I'll call that layout, let's say right. Let's see, yep. All right, so I got my layout right. And in my layout right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a line, and I'm going to put my menu over on the right, and then my HTML in the middle. I don't know why that's not refreshing. It must be something's going on. Well, I apologize about that, but what you'll see is the hamburger menu will be right here. I'm running a pre-release, so there must be something broken here. And then my HTML is in the middle here. Let's see. So with that in mind, I could also create a new layout called layout left. And then I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to add a line here, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put my hamburger menu on the left and my HTML in the middle. And again, I apologize, it's not showing very rapidly, but now my menu is over here and here. But they're doing the same thing, meaning that the items that are in here, menu and HTML, operate the same way. It's just they're oriented this way. Now, the important thing to realize is that if I click, I'm going to add a button in here, alpha, and I'm going to go ahead and add a new action, and it's going to be a control bar menu action. Okay, and the action is set the active control bar layout, and then I can pick it, control bar 1. You'll notice, oh, I didn't save them. Oh, dread. I could pick that layout that I want, left or right, and I can make that animated if I want. Now, what's going on is that this is the JavaScript that's going to happen, is that basically we get a pointer to the control bar, and then we just type in there which layout it is. So if I want layout left, I could say that. Now, when this piece of JavaScript runs, then the system's going to update your layout left and show you there. If I wanted the right, I would just put in right from that standpoint. So the issue is I can have multiple, and I'll go ahead and grab this, copy that real quick, copy, close, cancel. So now this control bar has the same kind of functionality, but it has one format, which is left and right. And then what I can do is that if I want to, I could have like a panel card down here where, and I'll go ahead and do this. Watch this. I'll go ahead. I wish I should have saved that. I'm sorry. Let's see if this works real quick. Okay, there we go. Okay, so let's see if I'm going to do it. I'm going to make this work. Bear with me here. So I'm going to go to control bar. Even though it's not refreshing here, I'm going to add a new layout, and I'm going to call it layout left. Okay, so in this case, if I'm left-handed, I want the menu, the it to be on the left side. So I want my hamburger menu to be on the left side, and in the middle I want my little piece there. And then I'm going to add another layout here called layout right. And since I'm a righty, it's going to be easier for me to have my menu over on the right-hand side as God intended. And there from there. Okay, so now it's not showing here, but I've got layout left and layout right. Okay, so let's go ahead and just let's go ahead and go to panel card number 4, and I'm going to add 2 buttons. And the first button I'm going to say left, and the second button here, just to demonstrate how this works, is called right. Okay, so the left one I'm going to say, and by the way, I could have done this by using Action JavaScript and rebuilt this that way. I'm just shortcutting because we only have a few minutes left. And then on there, I'm going to click here, and I'm going to go into text mode, and I'm going to say layout left. Okay. So now let's go to our working preview here. And I'm going to cheat here and go here. Okay, so notice my toolbar up here. Left, right. What's going on? Did I put in the wrong? Huh. Well, let's have it do it here.
Demo, huh?
Yeah, no, I know. Huh. Why isn't that there? And we'll make it right. Okay. Okay. There we go. Check that out. Isn't that cool? Now notice,
All right.
menu. Uh-oh, there's a couple adjustments I need to make. So there's a few other little things you can do, which I haven't caught here, is that I'd probably create 2 menu objects. Like if you'll notice in here, and I'll show you why that's happening real quick before we end up here. So I have this thing called a menu layout, and you'll notice that my menu items are here. But more importantly is it's how those are displayed. They come out from the left or the right. So I've only got a couple minutes here. Let's see. Okay, so you'll notice here that I have a menu and it's doing outside before. That means that when it shows this, it's always going to sweep out from the left side. I would create another menu with the same menu items, but I would say outside after, and it would sweep from the right side. So there's a little adjustment here. But the bottom line is that you can add multiple layouts. You can then use the JavaScript here to trigger those. Now, the cool thing about that, and back to the original question, was I could create a setting in here that says, are you left-handed or right-handed? And then what I could do is, once I've identified that, I could trigger the correct layout to be shown on there. And what I can also do, if I go to client side on PhoneGap Ready, I can actually have that code right there and have like a if-then statement saying if they're a lefty, show this, if they're a righty, show this. So you can actually use, have the person put in their preference, and then when the app runs, it says, what is your preference? And then based on that, it says, okay, use the particular layout that you want to. And there's a few nuances there. But that's the bottom line of how that would work. And the cool thing about that is that the user, once it's set up, it's just they're all of a sudden it's going to be they'll either see left or right, and it'll just show up on the screen, and they'll be able to use the left menu if they're lefty, right if they're a righty, and they'll be able to handle that, no problem there. So I hope that gives you a little kind of input on it, and it's really just grabbing a preference that is saved with the user and then emitting that JavaScript to say, hey, use this layout instead of this layout.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Shan.
Yeah.
Looking through, we are running out of time. We have a whole bunch of great questions, though, that are left. I'm just trying to choose one that we can get done in a reasonable amount of time. 2 minutes. All right. Well, here's a real quick question about control bars. This person wants to be able to say, have the control bars say display the name of the person who is logged in.
Great.
That's hard to do in a minute and a half, but we'll.
But I'll give you a hint. Okay.
All right.
So with control bars, and by the way, if you go to about 2 months back, there was a great webinar where we actually walked through exactly how to do that. So there's a pre-made video where I literally spent a half hour walking you through that. Control bar are made up of things called items. And so when I created my layouts here, I was putting items on the control bar. And it doesn't show here, but I have a menu and then I had an HTML. But also control bars have something called data. And what a data item is, think of it as a variable that lives on the control bar. And that variable has an initial value, but then if I want to, I can change the value of that any time. So let's go ahead and run this and take a look and see how this works real quick, only in the last minute here. So you'll notice I have my initial variable, in this case is actually an SVG icon. It could have been a piece of text. Now notice what happens when I click here. When I'm doing there, you'll see, and it's kind of hard to see, it's a little small, but my thermometer is changing in terms of what it looks like, because what I do is when I click this icon here, I'm updating the data value, and that data value then is re-rendered on the screen. And that data value is text, is imagery, it's HTML, it's anything you want. So how that's happening is I have a control bar action that says update control bar data. I give it the control bar, which one it is. I tell it which variable to update, SVG icon, and then I tell it what I want to set it to. And again, I go through this in the video on the other one from there. Now, if I want to, I could actually view the JavaScript, and this is the JavaScript right here. I get a pointer to my control bar. I get this is the data item. I set the data to be this, and then I do what's called an update of the data on there. So what's cool is that you can actually then, if you want to, let's say they click on a list control, you can run this little piece of JavaScript, grab the current list value and put it on there. And if you look at that video, I literally walk you through how to set it up with the list control and how it updates the field on the top. You could easily do that again when the person logs in on the let's see which, I'm sorry, server client-side events on PhoneGap Ready, you can run that JavaScript that will then update the control bar to put the person's logged in information in, whatever's saved locally, like using a data variable or something, like a local storage variable or something along those lines. So that was just kind of a quick overview, but that presentation 2 weeks ago will show you exactly how, or about 2 months ago, we'll show you how to do it.
Excellent. So we are out of time, but questions we didn't get to can be sent to guides, GUIDES, at alphasoftware.com, and we'd be happy to look at them for the next session. I want to thank all of you for attending and all of you who asked questions, and Dan, thanks so much for presenting. Hope to see you next week at our next webinar. Take care and have a great day. Bye-bye.